The emergency department had almost settled into the quiet rhythm of a rainy evening when two black government SUVs rolled silently into the hospital parking lot. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just officials carrying a sealed black case that never left their hands. Inside, a woman in faded blue scrubs knelt beside a broken wheelchair, calmly tightening a loose bolt with a small wrench borrowed from the maintenance room. Some nurses still called her the bus mechanic, a nickname that followed her from the rural county garage where she had spent most of her life before joining the hospital's maintenance support team. No one looked at her twice. Then the lead state investigator stepped through the automatic doors, opened the classified case file, studied one faded photograph, and quietly asked, "Where is she?" The room assumed they were searching for a doctor. They were wrong. Rain had been falling over the valley since before sunrise. By evening, the parking lot outside Pine Ridge Community Hospital reflected the glow of ambulance lights in long, wavering streaks. The storm had flooded several country roads, delayed supply deliveries, and pushed the small rural hospital close to its limits. Every bed was occupied. Every hallway carried the quiet urgency that only medical staff understood. Inside, people moved quickly but spoke softly. Nurses exchanged patient updates without raising their voices. Respiratory therapists rolled oxygen tanks from room to room. The emergency department accepted another ambulance while the maintenance crew hurried to deal with another power fluctuation caused by the weather. In a hospital this small, everyone did more than one job. Near the rear service entrance, a woman wearing faded blue work clothes pushed an old maintenance cart toward the ambulance bay. A flashlight, electrical tester, socket set, spare wheelchair bearings, and several neatly labeled tool pouches were arranged with almost military precision. Her name was Claire Morgan. Most people simply called her the bus mechanic. Years earlier, she had spent nearly 2 decades maintaining rural school buses and emergency transport vehicles across neighboring counties. When the local transportation department reduced its workforce, she accepted a position maintaining hospital transport vans, patient wheelchairs, generators, and other equipment that larger hospitals usually assigned to specialized contractors. Some employees appreciated her. Others quietly wondered why someone who repaired buses belonged inside a hospital. Claire never argued with either opinion. She simply worked. As she crossed the ambulance bay, one of the transport wheelchairs caught her attention. The chair had been parked against a wall after bringing in an elderly patient only minutes earlier. She stopped. Most people would have walked past without noticing anything unusual. Claire crouched beside the left wheel. She rotated it once with 2 fingers. A barely audible grinding sound answered her. Without hesitation, she opened a small pouch from her cart, removed a wrench, loosened the wheel assembly, cleaned away several grains of road grit trapped inside the bearing, applied fresh lubricant, tightened everything again, and spun the wheel a second time. Silent. The entire repair took less than 2 minutes. No one had asked her to do it. No one even noticed she had stopped. A young nurse rushed past carrying medication trays. "You still fixing chairs, Claire?" Claire smiled politely. "They're easier to repair before they fail." The nurse laughed. "I wish people worked that way." Then she disappeared through the emergency doors. Claire placed the wrench back into its exact position inside the tool roll before continuing toward the mechanical room. Nothing on her cart was ever misplaced. Nothing remained dirty. Every tool returned to the same location every time. It was simply how she preferred to work. The hospital's chief engineer, Daniel Foster, met her beside the backup generator room. Generator 3 gave another voltage warning. Claire looked toward the electrical panel. Did it reset itself? Daniel nodded. For now. She removed the panel cover and spent nearly a minute watching the readings without touching anything. Daniel shifted impatiently. "You see something?" Claire waited another few seconds. There. A tiny fluctuation crossed one display. Loose neutral connection. Daniel frowned. "That small. It'll become large if we ignore it." Within 15 minutes, the problem was corrected. The generator returned to perfect stability. Daniel shook his head. "I probably would have replaced half the system before finding that." Claire shrugged. Sometimes the loudest problems start quietly. She collected her tools and moved on without another word. Around the hospital, people had formed opinions about Claire long before they truly knew her. Some believed she was overly quiet. Others thought she simply lacked confidence around medical professionals. A few assumed she was intimidated by doctors because she had never attended medical school. The assumptions never seemed to bother her. She greeted everyone with the same calm expression. She listened more than she spoke. She never interrupted conversations. She never corrected people unless safety depended on it. Even then, she chose her words carefully. Late that afternoon, another maintenance worker struggled with a jammed automatic door leading into the emergency wing. He kicked the lower panel in frustration. "It keeps sticking." Claire stepped beside him. "Don't force it." He sighed. "It's just an old motor." She crouched and watched the door complete 2 opening cycles. Then she looked upward instead of downward. The sensor bracket shifted. He blinked. "What?" She tightened 2 loose mounting screws above the frame. The door immediately opened smoothly. The younger technician stared. "How did you know?" Claire wiped rainwater from the screwdriver before placing it back into her kit. The motor wasn't hesitating. The sensor was. He smiled awkwardly. "I would have spent an hour replacing parts." Claire answered with the same quiet tone. "Replacing parts is easier than watching carefully." Then she walked away. As evening settled across the hospital, the cafeteria slowly emptied while night shift employees arrived carrying coffee cups and backpacks. Claire sat alone near a window for exactly 10 minutes. She drank black coffee. She read the maintenance schedule. She never checked her phone. When her break ended, she folded the schedule neatly, threw away the empty cup, and returned to work without wasting a second. Several nurses entered just as she left. One smiled. "There goes our bus mechanic." Another laughed. "I still can't believe maintenance hired someone from the county garage. At least everything she touches keeps working." "True. But she's so serious. I've never even heard her tell a joke." Their conversation faded as Claire disappeared down the hallway. If she heard them, she gave no sign. Near sunset, heavy rain briefly knocked out commercial power across 3 nearby towns. Without warning, the hospital lights dimmed. For less than a second, darkness filled the corridors. Then the backup generators activated. Monitors restarted. Ventilators continued running. Emergency lighting illuminated every hallway. Doctors barely paused. Patients remained safe. Most people thanked the backup systems. Very few knew Claire had spent the previous week replacing aging electrical relays that everyone else believed. Rain continued to fall across the valley as darkness settled over Pine Ridge Community Hospital. The emergency entrance remained busy, with ambulances arriving one after another because several nearby roads had become unsafe. Inside, the staff focused on patients, unaware that another kind of arrival was quietly changing the course of the night. 3 black government SUVs turned into the hospital driveway without flashing lights or police escorts. They parked near the administration entrance instead of the emergency bay. The vehicles looked ordinary, but the people stepping out did not. 4 men and 1 woman wore plain dark jackets instead of uniforms. Each carried official identification, but no department names were visible from a distance. The final person to leave the lead vehicle held a locked black briefcase with both hands. He never allowed anyone else to touch it. Hospital security noticed them immediately. Within minutes, the chief administrator, Margaret Ellis, hurried into the lobby to greet the unexpected visitors. "Good evening," she said politely. "I'm the hospital administrator. How may we help you?" The tallest official presented his identification. "My name is David Mercer." Margaret examined the credentials carefully. They were genuine, issued by the state government, but unusually restricted. Several sections were covered with security markings that she had never seen before. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "We're looking for 1 employee." "Which department?" "We'll discuss that privately." His calm voice carried neither urgency nor aggression. It sounded like someone accustomed to asking difficult questions without raising his voice. Margaret led the group into a small conference room overlooking the main corridor. Outside, nurses and reception staff exchanged curious glances. "Inspection," one whispered. "Maybe licensing." "No, they don't usually arrive at night." Nobody had an answer. Inside the conference room, Mercer placed the black briefcase on the table but did not open it immediately. Instead, he asked a simple question. How long has Claire Morgan worked here? Margaret frowned. Our maintenance technician? Yes. She looked genuinely confused. Almost 3 years. And before that? Margaret opened the employee database on her computer. It says County Transportation Department. Mercer nodded slightly. We know that. He waited. Is there anything else? Margaret scrolled farther. Nothing. No. The official exchanged a brief glance with the woman beside him. Has she ever discussed her previous career? Margaret smiled faintly. Honestly, Claire doesn't discuss herself very much. What kind of employee is she? Margaret thought for a moment. Reliable. Another pause. Anything else? Quiet. Another pause. Anything unusual? She almost laughed. The only unusual thing is that every machine she repairs keeps working. Mercer made no comment. Finally, he unlocked the black briefcase. Inside rested a thick classified file secured with a red evidence band. Every page carried heavy redactions. Many names had been removed completely. Mercer carefully turned several pages before stopping at an old photograph. The image showed a younger Claire. She wore different clothing. Her posture was unmistakably disciplined. Even though much of the photograph had been censored, Margaret immediately recognized her face. She looked up in surprise. That's Claire. Mercer closed the file without another word. We'll need to speak with her. Margaret hesitated. May I ask why? I'm afraid I can't answer that. Is she in trouble? No. Has she committed a crime? No. Then why all this? Mercer looked directly at her. Because someone may already know she's here. Those words settled heavily over the room. For the first time, Margaret realized this was not an inspection. Something much larger was happening. While the meeting continued upstairs, Claire remained exactly where everyone expected her to be. She was kneeling beside Hospital Transport Van 2 inside the maintenance garage. The vehicle had returned from transferring a patient to a larger trauma center nearly an hour earlier. Its driver had reported nothing unusual. Still, Claire inspected every tire, every light, every brake line, every fluid level. When she reached beneath the chassis with her flashlight, she noticed a fresh scratch running across one protective panel. Not serious, but recent. She studied it for several seconds before standing again. The driver walked into the garage carrying paperwork. Everything okay? Claire nodded. Probably road debris. You always check this carefully? I check everything. He laughed. I guess that's why they call you the mechanic. Claire smiled politely. They're not wrong. She closed the inspection panel and signed the maintenance log. Nothing in her expression suggested concern. Yet her eyes briefly drifted toward the hospital entrance where the government vehicles remained parked in the rain. She noticed them. She simply chose not to react. Upstairs, Mercer continued asking questions. Who has access to Claire's personnel records? Human Resources. We'll need complete copies. Margaret called the HR office. 10 minutes later, a thick employee file arrived. Mercer reviewed it carefully. Employment application, tax forms, certification records, maintenance licenses, background check. Everything appeared ordinary. Too ordinary. The woman accompanying Mercer quietly spoke for the first time. Page 32. Margaret turned the page. A section of employment history was missing. Not erased. Not damaged. Simply absent. The numbering skipped from page 31 to page 34. Margaret stared. That shouldn't happen. Mercer already knew. It wasn't removed here. You mean? It was never included. Silence filled the room. Margaret had approved hundreds of employee files during her career. She had never seen one like this. Mercer closed the folder. Until further notice, please don't discuss our visit with anyone. Even Claire. Especially Claire. Margaret blinked. You don't want her to know you're here? Mercer answered carefully. We need to know whether she notices us on her own. Downstairs, Claire pushed her maintenance cart through the intensive care hallway. A nurse stopped her. Claire, room 8's wheelchair brake is sticking again. I'll take care of it. She entered the room quietly so she would not disturb the elderly patient sleeping near the window. Within moments, the brake worked perfectly. Before leaving, the rain showed no sign of stopping. Water streamed down the hospital windows while the night shift settled into its routine. Inside the emergency department, doctors focused on patients injured in weather-related accidents. Outside, the government vehicles remained parked in silence. Claire continued her rounds as if nothing had changed. She inspected emergency lighting in one corridor, replaced a damaged caster on an 4-stand, and reset a malfunctioning automatic door. To everyone watching, she looked exactly as she had every other day. But her attention had quietly shifted. As she passed the main reception area, she noticed 2 unfamiliar men entering through the public entrance. Nothing about them seemed immediately alarming. Both wore clean outdoor jackets dampened by rain. One carried a backpack. The other held a small overnight bag. They approached reception separately. That caught Claire's attention. People traveling together usually arrived together. These 2 avoided even looking at each other. The receptionist smiled. "Can I help you?" The first man said he was visiting an uncle recovering from surgery. The second claimed he was waiting for his wife, who had come in earlier that evening. Simple answers. Nothing unusual. Yet Claire noticed both men answered too quickly, as if the stories had been memorized rather than remembered. She kept walking. She did not stare. She did not slow down. By the time she reached the maintenance hallway, she had already memorized their faces. Upstairs, David Mercer stood beside a window overlooking the entrance. One of his investigators approached quietly. "Our surveillance team confirms the 2 individuals from the parking lot have entered the building." Mercer nodded. "They've split up." "Yes." "They're following the expected pattern." Margaret Ellis overheard the conversation. "Expected pattern?" Mercer remained calm. "We're monitoring a developing situation. Shouldn't hospital security know?" "They know enough." "Enough for what?" Mercer looked toward the emergency department below. "To avoid making the wrong move." Meanwhile, Claire entered the hospital workshop to collect replacement batteries for portable suction units. As she reached the storage shelves, she paused. One cabinet door stood slightly open. She always closed every cabinet. Always. Someone had searched inside. Nothing appeared missing. But several labeled containers had been moved only a few centimeters. Most people would never have noticed. Claire did. She slowly closed the cabinet and continued working. No visible reaction. Inside her mind, however, another small piece joined the growing picture. Minutes later, one of the unfamiliar visitors walked through the diagnostic imaging hallway. He wasn't lost. He wasn't looking for a patient room. Instead, he quietly observed emergency exits, security cameras, and staff-only doors. Claire watched his reflection in a polished floor buffer parked against the wall. She never looked directly at him. He stopped beside a fire exit. Read the evacuation map. Counted something under his breath. Then walked away. Claire waited until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did she approach the same evacuation map. Nothing had changed. Except one thing. The protective cover had been touched. Fresh fingerprints covered the clear plastic. Again, she said nothing. At the nurse's station, Emily, one of the younger nurses, waved Claire over. "Can you help me?" Claire smiled. "What happened?" "The medication refrigerator keeps making a strange noise." Claire listened for several seconds. "The cooling fan. Is it serious?" "Not yet." Emily laughed. "You always say, 'not yet.'" Claire carefully removed the rear panel. A small piece of plastic packaging had become trapped inside the fan blades. She removed it. The noise disappeared instantly. Emily shook her head. "I would have called for a replacement." Claire reattached the panel. "Sometimes the problem isn't the machine." "What is it?" "Something small blocking it." Emily smiled. I wish everything in life worked that way. Claire didn't answer. Her attention had shifted again. Across the corridor, the first unfamiliar visitor had quietly stopped outside the intensive care unit. He wasn't looking through the glass at patients. He was watching the security keypad beside the door. Elsewhere in the hospital, Mercer received another update. Our background team verified both visitors. And their identities are false. Margaret looked up sharply. What? The documents they're using belong to real people. But the photographs don't match. A heavy silence filled the room. Mercer closed the classified folder. They're here. Hospital security prepared to approach the suspicious men. Mercer raised a hand. Not yet. If they're using fake identities. I know. We should remove them immediately. No. The younger officer frowned. Why wait? Mercer's answer was simple. Because someone inside this hospital already noticed them. He looked toward the maintenance hallway. And I want to know what she does next. Claire pushed her maintenance cart toward the service elevator. Halfway there, she stopped beside a vending machine. Not because she wanted a drink. Because the polished glass reflected nearly the entire lobby behind her. Both unfamiliar visitors appeared in the reflection. For the first time that evening, they looked directly at one another. Only for a second. A tiny nod. Then they separated again. That single movement confirmed what Claire had suspected from the moment they entered. They were working together. She quietly picked up a bottle of water from the machine, paid for it, and continued walking as though she had seen nothing at all. No alarm. No panic. No dramatic confrontation. Just another observation added to a growing list. Somewhere nearby, two strangers were carefully studying the hospital. And Claire had begun studying them first. The hospital did not change. But Claire Morgan did. Not in appearance. Not in behavior. Only in attention. She continued moving through corridors, responding to maintenance calls, repairing equipment, and keeping her presence exactly where everyone expected it to be. But now, every movement around her had weight. Every unfamiliar face became a variable. Every corridor became a map. The two visitors had already split the hospital into invisible sectors without anyone noticing. Claire saw it forming. Not as fear. As structure. In the intensive care wing, one of the suspicious men stood longer than necessary outside a patient monitoring station. He was not reading the patient chart. He was studying the access panel. Claire appeared at the end of the corridor carrying a replacement oxygen regulator. She slowed only once. Not to observe him directly, but to observe his reflection in the glass cabinet beside him. His hand hovered near the keypad. Not touching. Waiting. Like he was confirming timing. Then he moved away. Claire walked past without stopping. But she noted the detail. He did not belong to curiosity. He belonged to planning. Upstairs, Mercer reviewed live updates with his team. They're no longer moving randomly, one analyst said. They're mapping, another added. Margaret frowned. Mapping what? Mercer did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the hospital layout displayed on a digital screen. After a pause, he said, The building. A heavy silence followed. You think they're preparing an attack? Margaret asked. I think they are preparing access. Access to what? Mercer finally turned. That depends on who they're looking for. Claire reached the maintenance storage room. The lights flickered once. Not a full outage. Just a hesitation in power flow. She stopped immediately. Looked up at the ceiling panel. Listened. Then continued walking. Inside the storage room, she checked supply counts. Nothing missing. But something was wrong. Not in inventory. In sequence. Items had been shifted again. Not taken. Reordered. As if someone had tested what she would notice. She slowly closed the logbook. And for the first time that night, she did not immediately move to the next task. She stood still. Thinking. A soft emergency call came through the intercom. ICU nurse station, please respond. Claire was already moving before the announcement finished. When she arrived, She saw Nurse Emily standing near a medication fridge. "The system locked itself again," Emily said. "After you fixed it earlier." Claire looked at the panel. This was not a failure. This was interference. Someone had triggered a controlled lockout cycle. Not to break the system. To study response time. Claire placed her hand on the control panel but did not open it yet. Instead, she watched the hallway reflection. Empty. For now. She reset the system in under 20 seconds. The fridge unlocked. Emily exhaled. That was fast. Claire closed the panel. It shouldn't have happened twice. Emily frowned. "Do you think it's the system?" Claire paused. "No." Then she left. Outside ICU room 12, the second visitor stood completely still. This time, Claire saw him directly. No reflection. No obstruction. Just distance. He was watching the door access pattern. Every staff entry. Every exit. Timing. Intervals. Claire continued walking. But her pace changed slightly. Not faster. More deliberate. Mercer received another update. "We confirmed something unusual," the analyst said. "What?" "Both visitors are not just using false identities." Mercer listened carefully. "They are using structured behavioral replication." Margaret frowned. "I don't understand." The analyst hesitated. "They are not pretending to be people. They are testing systems." Mercer exhaled slowly. "Then we are already inside Phase 2. Claire reached the emergency equipment corridor. She opened a locked cabinet. Checked the contents. Everything in place. Except one item. A trauma kit strap had been loosened. Not broken. Not damaged. Loosened. She stared at it for a few seconds. Then tightened it carefully. Not alarmed. But aware. Someone inside the hospital was not just observing. They were rehearsing control points. In the lobby, the two visitors briefly crossed paths again. No conversation. No acknowledgement. Just a single shared glance. Enough to confirm coordination. Claire saw it from the upper hallway glass. This time she did not look away immediately. She watched long enough to understand the pattern. They were not searching randomly. They were narrowing. Toward something. Or someone. Mercer made a decision. "We change posture," he said. Margaret blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means we stop observing passively. We intervene. Controlled intervention. Won't that alert them?" Mercer looked at the hospital map again. "They already know we exist." A pause. "But they don't know what we know." Downstairs, Claire stopped beside a maintenance elevator. The doors were open longer than normal. Not broken. Delayed. She placed her cart inside. Then stepped in. Before pressing a button, she looked at the ceiling camera. It had moved. Not physically, but directionally. It was no longer scanning corridors randomly. It was tracking motion patterns. Claire pressed the basement level. As the doors closed, she finally allowed one thought to form fully. This was not a random threat. This was structured reconnaissance inside a functioning hospital. Which meant one thing. They were preparing for a moment. Not chaos. Execution. And somewhere deep inside the building, the search was getting closer to her. The hospital began to feel different, even though nothing obvious had changed. Lights still worked. Patients were still treated. Monitors still beeped in steady rhythm. But systems began behaving like they were being tested rather than used. Door delays. Minor sensor resets. Brief communication lag. Small things. Almost invisible. But not to Claire. She noticed every one of them. And she began quietly correcting without revealing a pattern. A sensor realigned. A circuit stabilized. A lock reset before it could be triggered again. No one asked her to do this. No one saw the full sequence. But someone was learning the building. And she was quietly making that learning incomplete. Upstairs, Mercer studied a new report. "They're adapting," the analyst said. "Faster than expected." Margaret looked stressed. What are they adapting to? Mercer answered without hesitation. Resistance. Claire stood alone in a service corridor. She opened a maintenance panel. Inside, wiring had been slightly disturbed. Not damaged. Probed. She adjusted it carefully. Then paused. This was no longer observation. This was rehearsal for control failure. She closed the panel slowly, and made a decision without speaking it aloud. From this moment, she would no longer just repair. She would shape response time itself. And for the first time, Claire Morgan stopped being just someone everyone overlooked, and started becoming something the hospital had never been prepared to contain. The rain outside began to slow, but the hospital did not feel calmer. It felt more focused, as if something inside it had started narrowing its attention. Claire Morgan felt it first in the smallest details. A delay in a door response. A camera that paused half a second too long. A staff corridor that seemed to be used more frequently than necessary. None of it was random anymore. It was coordinated, and coordination meant intent. In the ICU corridor, Nurse Emily approached Claire again. "Do you have a minute?" Claire nodded. "What happened?" "There's a problem with room 14's monitoring feed. IT says it's fine, but the display keeps freezing for a few seconds." Claire did not answer immediately. She walked to the room, observed the monitor, waited through 2 full cycles, then checked the signal line behind the panel. A small inline filter had been installed. Not part of hospital equipment. Not recorded in maintenance logs. Claire stared at it for a long moment, then removed it. The monitor stabilized instantly. Emily frowned. "That wasn't there before, right?" Claire's voice stayed calm. "No." A pause. "Someone added it." Emily looked uneasy. "Why would someone do that?" Claire reattached the panel. "To see what breaks when they do." Emily didn't understand, but Claire already moved on. Upstairs, Mercer's team confirmed a troubling update. "They're not just moving through the hospital anymore," the analyst said. "They're interacting with systems." Margaret crossed her arms. "Meaning what exactly?" Mercer replied quietly. "They're simulating control." Silence followed. Then Margaret asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. "Control of what?" Mercer looked down at the hospital map. Everything connected to response time. Claire entered the maintenance supply room again. This time, she did not immediately check inventory. She checked placement. Items were not missing, but their arrangement had shifted again. Slightly. Deliberately. Like someone was testing whether she would notice patterns under pressure. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, and began correcting everything back to exact order. Not out of routine. Out of necessity. Because disorder was becoming a language, and someone was learning to speak it through the hospital itself. A soft alarm sounded in the distance. Not emergency. A system alert. Power fluctuation in a secondary corridor. Claire moved immediately. When she arrived, she found a maintenance technician already there. "False alarm," he said. "Just a dip in voltage." Claire looked at the panel. The fluctuation was artificial. Short. Controlled. Timed. She reset the system without arguing. But she did not leave immediately. Instead, she studied the pattern. 3 fluctuations. Each separated by identical intervals. Not malfunction. Testing rhythm. Someone was measuring reaction consistency. Claire finally spoke. "This is going to repeat." The technician looked confused. "What is?" She did not explain. She simply walked away. Mercer received confirmation from surveillance. "They triggered another system dip," the analyst said. "And response time was recorded." Margaret exhaled sharply. "So they're studying how fast we react." Mercer nodded. "And how predictable that reaction is." A pause. Then he added, "They're building a model of the hospital." Claire stood alone near a stairwell. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to stop moving completely. She listened. Not to sounds. To timing. Doors opening. Footsteps. Elevator cycles. Ventilation shifts. Everything inside a hospital has rhythm. And someone had started altering that rhythm subtly. She realized something important. They were not trying to create chaos. They were trying to map stability limits. Where systems fail under minimal stress. Where people hesitate. Where control breaks first. And that meant they were not planning a sudden attack. They were planning precision disruption. A quiet voice came from behind her. You always stand like that when you're thinking. Claire turned slightly. It was Daniel, the chief engineer. He looked tired. Everything okay? Claire hesitated, then answered carefully. Not yet. Daniel frowned. That doesn't sound reassuring. It isn't meant to be. A pause. He lowered his voice. Security is saying strange things are happening in the building. Claire did not respond immediately. Then she said, They're not strange. What are they then? Claire looked toward the corridor lights. Controlled. Daniel stared at her. Controlled by who? Claire didn't answer. Because she didn't have confirmation yet. Only pattern. And pattern was becoming enough. Upstairs, Mercer made a decision. We restrict movement in non-essential corridors. Margaret looked concerned. That will disrupt hospital flow. Good, Mercer replied. Disruption breaks their model. He paused. But it also forces them to adapt faster. A silence followed. Then he added, And we need to see how they adapt. Claire returned to the emergency equipment storage area. One cabinet was open again. But this time, something was different. Inside, every item had been rearranged into a sequence. Not random. Not careless. Ordered. Like steps. She stood still for a long moment. Then closed the cabinet without touching anything. Because now she understood. They were not just observing. They were building a procedural map of hospital response under pressure. And someone inside this hospital was no longer just being watched. They were being studied as the central variable. And Claire Morgan finally understood the direction of the search. It was not spreading outward anymore. It was tightening inward. Toward her. The classified file did not contain a biography in the normal sense. There were no simple timelines. No full service records. No complete identity history. Only fragments. Redacted operations. Partial mission reports. And scattered psychological evaluations written by people who clearly understood the weight of what they were describing. Mercer turned one page slowly. A single line remained visible. Subject demonstrates non-standard crisis cognition under medical infrastructure stress environments. Margaret read it and frowned. What does that even mean? Mercer answered quietly. It means she thinks like someone who has already lived through controlled emergencies. Downstairs, Claire entered the supply corridor again. But something had changed. The air felt heavier with structure. Not physical pressure. Operational pressure. She noticed two staff members standing near a junction point longer than necessary. They were not talking. They were waiting. Not for patience. For confirmation. Claire adjusted her direction slightly and walked through a different corridor. Not because she was avoiding them. Because she was no longer interested in being predictable. Upstairs, Mercer closed the file halfway. She was never just maintenance support, he said. Margaret looked uneasy. Then what was she? Mercer paused. A stabilizer. The word did not make sense immediately. He clarified. Whenever systems collapsed in controlled environments, she was placed inside them. Margaret's expression shifted. You mean hospitals? Not only hospitals. A long silence. Mercer continued. Disaster zones. Transport hubs. Temporary field clinics. Margaret stepped back slightly. That's not a job category. No, Mercer agreed. It's a containment function. Downstairs, Claire stopped walking. For the first time that night, she felt it clearly. Not surveillance. Not testing. Recognition. Someone upstairs was connecting pieces she had spent years trying to leave disconnected. She adjusted her grip on her maintenance cart. Not tense. Prepared. The hospital lights flickered again. This time, longer than before. Emergency systems compensated instantly. But Claire noticed something else. The flicker was synchronized with movement in the corridor. Not random. Timed to human motion flow. Someone was measuring how people reacted to environmental uncertainty. She looked up slowly and realized something important. They were not just analyzing the hospital. They were analyzing her response inside it. Upstairs, Mercer made a decision that changed everything. "We initiate controlled exposure," he said. Margaret immediately objected. "That will put staff at risk." "No," Mercer replied. "It will reveal intention." He paused. "Right now, they are learning us. We need to learn them faster." Claire reached the ICU junction and stopped. 2 corridors. Both clear. But only one felt correct. Not logically. Structurally. She chose the left corridor. And as she stepped forward, she noticed something new. A camera slightly adjusted its angle. Not tracking general movement. Tracking her specifically. For the first time, Claire acknowledged something internally she had avoided naming. This was no longer a hospital under observation. It was an environment being calibrated around her presence. And that meant one thing. They already suspected who she was. They just did not yet have confirmation. Mercer's controlled exposure began within the hour. Non-essential systems were intentionally staggered. Lighting delays introduced. Door timing slightly randomized. Communication routing subtly altered. Not enough to alarm staff, but enough to create uncertainty patterns. And immediately, the visitors responded. Not with panic, but refinement. They adjusted faster than expected. As if uncertainty was not a threat, but a dataset. Claire felt the shift instantly. The hospital was no longer behaving like a facility. It was behaving like a test environment under live evaluation. She moved through a service corridor and saw something that confirmed it. A visitor standing still near a maintenance junction. Not entering rooms. Not interacting. Just observing delay between staff responses. Counting. Measuring. Recording without devices. Memory-based mapping. Claire stopped at a distance and made her own decision. If they were mapping response time, then she would remove time as a reliable variable. She began intervening silently. A loose cable corrected before failure. A delayed door reset before triggering confusion. A malfunctioning alert suppressed before escalation. No one saw the full pattern. Only improved stability. But what Claire was actually doing was far more precise. She was breaking predictive consistency. Making the hospital unreadable as a system. Upstairs, Mercer studied incoming reports. "They can't stabilize their model," the analyst said. "Why not?" "Something keeps altering their data consistency." Margaret looked confused. "What kind of interference?" Mercer answered quietly. "Human interference." A pause. "And it's precise." Claire reached the emergency stairwell. And stopped. Someone was waiting on the landing below. Not blocking. Not hiding. Just positioned. Like they already knew she would arrive. For the first time, Claire did not immediately continue walking. She observed. He observed back. No movement. No dialogue. Just recognition forming in silence. And in that moment, Claire understood the final truth of the night. This was no longer about identifying intruders. It was about confirming identity of the only variable in the system they could not fully model. Her. Upstairs, Mercer finally issued the final instruction. "End the observation phase." Margaret exhaled in relief. Finally. But Mercer did not look relieved. Because ending observation did not mean ending interest. It meant moving to resolution. Downstairs, the visitors stopped moving simultaneously. Not retreating. Not fleeing. Resetting behavior. Claire saw it clearly now. They were preparing to leave. Not because they failed, because they had gathered enough. And that realization changed the weight of everything. Because in systems thinking, departure after data collection always means one thing. Analysis is complete. Claire stood in the corridor alone. The hospital returned slowly to normal rhythm. But nothing felt normal anymore. Because she knew something no one else fully understood yet. They had not come to disrupt the hospital. They had come to confirm a hypothesis. And she had just confirmed it for them, without ever speaking a word. By dawn, the rain had stopped completely. Pine Ridge Community Hospital resumed its ordinary rhythm. Patients were discharged. Shifts changed. Coffee machines filled the morning silence. No announcements were made. No public reports issued. No recognition delivered. The black government vehicles were gone. So were the classified officials. Only faint tire marks remained in the wet parking lot. Claire arrived before sunrise. Same routine. Same cart. Same tools. She repaired a broken wheelchair near the emergency entrance. Tightened a loose bolt. Tested the wheel once. Smooth. She nodded slightly. And moved on. No one stopped her. No one asked questions. And that was exactly how she preferred it. Somewhere in an undisclosed state office, the classified file was sealed again. Not closed. Not destroyed. Just stored. Because some identities were not meant to be fully revealed. Only acknowledged. And in the hospital, a quiet mechanic continued her work. Unnoticed. Unrecorded. But no longer unseen.